We got good? We're good?
We're good.
All right.
Need a second.
When they tell you in your ear it's time to wrap, just tell them, you know what to tell them.
Oh, yeah, just Steve's going to do whatever he wants.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. Tom, you know Sherry Swinks, right?
Hi.
Hi, Sherry.
How are you?
Doing well, and you?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Nate's
How-
over here too.
how's
Nate,
how's the weather?
It is
Hot.
sticky today.
it's hot AF, I think is what Sherry said this morning on the air. I heard that.
Did she really?
I heard that.
As long as you don't say WTF AF.
We're rolling? Okay, good to go. All right, we'll count in. Good to go?
Good.
Okay. All right. In 5, 4, 3. Welcome to Politics Now, where we talk about the news and with the newsmakers who are making that news. Today we welcome Tom Skancke to the show. Tom, you've been on here before, so welcome back.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
You were engaged in a study of the Clark County School District. It gives you kind of some unique knowledge of what is happening over there. We recently went through a crisis. We almost had a teacher strike, the first in my memory, and I've been here a long time. You've been here a long time as well. Who do you think is most responsible, if you had to say? The district, the superintendent, the board of trustees, the legislative leadership, or the teachers union itself?
You know, I think, Steve, it's really a culmination of everybody, I think, including the community. You can't just assign, quote, blame to one group. I think you said it in your column on Sunday, and I think your colleague John Ralston said it best. It really, you got to stop blaming everybody else, and we've got to take a little bit of responsibility here. In that, if K-12 education is going to be important to the Southern Nevada economy, then we have to prioritize it. The district always finds the money in these situations, and we know every year what the budget needs to be. We know every year what the outcomes need to be. So I think it's kind of ironic that at the last minute the district did find the money, and there is money. But you know, it really comes down to what are the priorities for the community. When I ran the Economic Alliance, we found that the 3 pillars of economic development was an educated workforce, was a thriving K-12 education system, and a thriving and high-performing transportation network. Those 3 things are inextricably linked.
And you found, in fact, that a lot of companies that didn't want to move to Nevada, the reason they gave was the education system.
Exactly, Steve. I was sitting in my office one day with a company from Korea. We had been trying to attract them here. And the gentleman that came in held up the Las Vegas Review-Journal headline that said, Nevada 49th in the nation.
Oops, sorry about that.
Right, exactly. And I didn't have an answer for him when he said, why? Why should I move my company here when you're 49th?
Because it's not only the educated workforce, but it's the employees of his company who have children who need to send them to schools.
Yeah, so, you know, I've said for years, and my Republican friends and people in the business community are going to hate what I'm going to say next, but, you know, if Nevada's tax structure was so great, and if that's why companies relocated, then why isn't every Fortune 50 company in the country and in the world doing business in Nevada? Why isn't Boeing and Facebook and Microsoft headquartered here? Why aren't all the banks headquartered here? And it really boils down to our K-12 system, because their employees don't want to relocate here because we don't prioritize it. We have some amazing teachers. We have some amazing performing schools. But really what it comes down to is, what are the priorities? If you look at, and I commend Governor Sandoval for what he did with the sunsets and, you know, basically putting $200 million in new revenue into K-12, but it's just not enough. When you look at most school districts around the country, most K-12 classrooms have 20 to 22 students. We have 35.
Yeah.
That's not education, that's daycare, right? At the end of the day, we have some amazing teachers. You and I both know many of them, right? Yeah. Why anyone today would want to become a teacher with the way they are treated and disrespected is unbelievable to me.
Somebody told me an analogy recently that said if you need to spend $100 to do something the right way, and we've been spending $10, and you could double that and start spending $20. Mm-hmm. You could triple it,
right,
to $30. You could go up to $50. You're still not close to where you need to be, and so that kind of gets lost in the overall debate because mostly we talk about little nuances, right? We're talking about, for example, the amount of money we're talking about for the continuing education for the teacher pay was about $15 million. Mm-hmm. Now the district said it didn't have that money. The teachers threatened to strike. The governor got involved. It came very close. The teachers were preparing to strike. Then all of a sudden it was found. I mean, people can be excused for being cynical, right? To say, well, you found it. It was there all along. Why did we have to go through this?
Yeah, so it's the shell game, right? And if you look at the trustees, they primarily have three responsibilities. They hire and fire the superintendent.
Yeah.
They pass a budget, which they've seen probably maybe 8, 12 hours if they're lucky before, that's prepared for by the staff. Because the trustees can't talk to each other under the Attorney General's letter from the mid-90s that says you can't talk to each other, which, by the way, they are the only governing board that has that restriction on them. So they can't talk to each other. And then union negotiations, that's their third responsibility. When we were trying to do the reorganization, which should have been successful, by the way, I think it was well thought out. There was a lot of support in the community for that. We fought the trustees every day. That was our biggest fight. And because the superintendent reports to the trustees, not to us, not to the legislature. In fact, the trustees don't report to anybody. They report to the voters. And because no one focuses on those trustee races, we all talk about it and we say, oh, we need better qualified trustees to be on the school district board. But no one engages in that process. They'd rather complain about it, and they would rather place blame than engage.
And do something, yeah.
And I think, as you and John pointed out, at some point, we all have to, as I said earlier, we have to step up and say this is a priority.
Yeah. What about a reform? We have in Nevada the Gaming Control Board, one of two agencies that oversees the state's gambling industry. And the Gaming Control Board has 3 appointees. They're appointed by the governor, but they must have expertise in certain areas: accounting, law enforcement, and law. So what about an idea to have maybe 3 trustees elected at large and 4 appointed, either by the governor or by local governments, but those 4 appointees required to have experience, for example, in running a multi-billion-dollar corporation or a multi-billion-dollar agency of some kind, accounting, classroom education, law, something like that, so that we know at least 4 of those trustees, when they see the budget, will have seen a budget of that size and complexity before.
So I think that's a great idea. In fact, as I was driving over here this morning, I was kind of thinking through what would that board look like. And you could elect them, but what if the governor had the ability to appoint all 7 members, or better yet 5, because I think 7 may be too many. I think a lot of these boards are too big. But we elect the governor, and the governor has thousands of appointments, from the Gaming Commission to the Department of Transportation to all of the other boards and commissions that the state has for chiropractors, cosmetology. Governor Sisolak's a businessman, right? And by the way, I commend him for stepping into this because it needed his leadership. But we elect our governor, and I think we should trust the governor to make the right decisions. And if those individuals on the school board were appointed, which, by the way, people will come back and say, well, the public has a right to vote. The public has a right to vote, I agree with that. But with what we are attracting for candidates to serve in those seats, because nobody wants that job,
right, then
we should take a look at a new system. Albert Einstein said, you've got to change your current pattern of thought to solve the problems you've created with your current pattern of thought, right? Change our pattern of thought and look at something different, which is You know, we pointed out to the Community Implementation Council when we were doing the reorganization, the Clark County School District, I think it was when we did that was, what, 16 or 17, had more revenue than Boyd Gaming. And I actually said publicly, this will not be popular either. I'm sure my Twitter will light up today on this, but you know, would you put any of those trustees on Boyd Gaming's board?
So it sounds like, you know, we talked earlier about everyone taking responsibility and reposing with all different groups, but it sounds like the trustees are probably where you would start if you wanted to reform the system.
Yeah, so if you look back, so I've been in Las Vegas since Dr. Cram was the superintendent. And we always do this to the superintendent. When we were doing the reorganization, I can't tell you how many people in the community said, you've got to make a recommendation to fire the superintendent. Well, one, we weren't given that authority. Two, that's the trustee's job. Three, I don't think it is the superintendent 80% of the time. Superintendent is given a budget amount from the legislature, and the superintendent, he or she works for the trustees. And in my opinion, there needs to be a reorganization of how those trustees serve and what their roles and responsibilities are. Think about the Gaming Commission. If the trustees were allowed to be appointed for just 6 years, okay? The culture at the school district is rumor and innuendo and gossip. The culture is if no one likes what someone else is saying, they start texting legislators and the trustees because someone was offended. And at the end of the day, that shouldn't be the culture, Steve. The culture should be, this is a priority for our community. And individual agendas and individual little fiefdoms that are built up, it's just not responsible when it comes to education. You can blame the Teachers Association, you can blame the superintendent. Everyone knows what the dollar amounts are. You can talk about when do you do the DSA or should you change the Nevada plan. We've got to stop throwing the education political football.
And they are changing the Nevada plan approved in the last legislature. It's an overhaul that's going to be done sort of in parallel with the current system there. But trustees being one thing, the other thing seems to be the money factor. I mean, we can't get around that, right? The money that needs to go into the school district is going to have to increase to achieve some of these ends. Is that right?
No question. I mean, it is fully underfunded, and I say that's probably an oxymoron, but we don't fund it the way we should. Now, people will say in the business community, well, you know, we'll support more money if we have more accountability. That doesn't add up. We have some amazing teachers. We have some amazing principals, great schools. The Education Association was the one that pushed for the peer assistance and review policy. PAR is very important. I mean, they pushed that. And by the way, they got pushback. I admire what John and the association does and what they tried to do.
Yeah.
And by the way, I have nothing but respect for John and what the Teachers Association does, because they are an advocate for their members.
Yeah, and a lot of people forget that. They say, well, the union doesn't care about children. Well, the union is not supposed to care about children. They're supposed to care about the union members. That's what they exist for. The teachers care about the children. But it seems to me one of the points made by the Teachers Association is an important point, and that is that there is a whole panoply of issues outside the classroom, off the campus, that have nothing to do with the district. The district has no control over them. Things like poverty, things like suicide, things like bad family situations, a lack of parent involvement, things that we could put $1 billion into the school system and wouldn't affect that. But yet, it does affect the schools and the outcomes. So anyone who tries to take on this challenge, as you found out with the reorganization and the studies that go on with there, is taking on a huge issue that extends far beyond the walls of any classroom in Clark County.
You know, Steve, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and he pointed out to me that this has been going on for 40 years, and it's probably going to take 40 years to unravel it.
Wow.
This is a community-wide problem. You know, when I was at the Economic Alliance, my board took a very public, as you know, a very public position on this, of supporting K through 12 education for what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And by the way, I wasn't the most popular guy in the business community for trying to do that. But it was the right thing to do. We have community-wide issues that Southern Nevada business community needs to address. If K through 12 education is a priority, then we need to make it a priority. There are lots of systemic issues. I mean, I can't tell you the number of kids who are homeless in the Clark County School
That's
District.
another one I forgot to mention. You're
And they come to school hungry, they don't have a home. But the interesting thing about it is they're still going to school because they want an education, because they want to get out of the situation that they're in.
Yeah.
And we can't as a community continue to do this. I think we have to do a little bit of this and start having a substantial conversation around what we want our K through 12 system to be.
Yeah.
You can't just blame the politicians. You can't just blame the Teachers Association. We really have to decide what we want to be.
But you can understand, though, you mentioned the business community talking about, you know, accountability. You can understand the business community saying, okay, listen, if I'm running my business and you're a consultant and you tell me if you put this much money into this, this is the outcome that you will get and you'll advance your business in that fashion. They look at the school system and say the same kind of thing. They say, well, listen, if we make that investment, what can we expect? And if the answer is, well, we'll take it from there or we'll see what happens, you can understand that they'd be a little bit skeptical, right? I mean, when you're talking about that community conversation, you're talking about we've got to set some goals for what the outcomes can be, solid outcomes, so that when we make this investment, there's something to show for it.
No question. By the way, if there weren't so many agendas, right, for specific special interest groups, I think those outcomes could be achieved. But I'll give you an example. If there's any type of discussion around, pick a group, pick any group inside of the district, then this special interest group surfaces to say you can't cut that,
Yeah.
right? If you have any type of conversation around how we're going to increase performance in low-performing schools, another group surfaces and says you can't just pick on those, right?
Yeah.
We found in our process that if you add a third bell time to the delivery in our education system in a day, you would save between $40 and $45 million that you could actually put back into the classroom, okay? Well, that was probably about as popular as a grenade in a bowl of oatmeal, right? And no one wanted to address that because the answer that we got, by the way, let me back up. There is study after study after study after study in this country that high school students that go to school later in the day perform better because they're not going to bed at 8 o'clock at night,
Sure,
right?
yeah, that has been around for a long time.
For decades. So we found in working with the district that if you add a third bell time, you would save between $40 and $45 million.
And improve performance.
And improve performance. We couldn't have the conversation because it wasn't popular, one.
So how do you do that? I mean, you were head of the Global Economic Alliance, which had a membership that was very diverse. You had to sort of herd those cats and get everybody on the same page, working toward the same goal. So how would somebody who is charged with improving education, what very broad topic as we've been discussing, how would they get everybody on the page moving in that direction?
So
how do you overcome those special interests that surface all the time to say, no, we can't do this or we can't do that?
So good question, and if I had that answer, I probably would be out doing it. But I think there's a couple of things, Steve. One is, if you look at that third bell time as an example, it was so unpopular because we have so many one-parent households and two parents working that the older kids have to get home from school before the younger kids so that there was at least someone in the home taking care of the younger kids.
Okay.
Right? So that was an issue. Second of all, there's no willingness to take on any substantial policy issues. People, you know, the district loves, the trustees love to talk about sex education because it's, quote, sexy, right? And it creates controversy and it's something that they can talk about. But at some point, there has to be the conversation around what do we want the education system to look like and how it is delivered. And if you can get people to agree, which is difficult in education. Part of the reason is we all went to school, so we're all experts, right? But there are some experts in the field. And I think one of the issues that we have to look at is, you know, our legislature elects new people every session who claim to have the solution to the K through 12 problem, when in fact the school districts in the state haven't even had time to implement what happened from the previous session.
Right.
So by the time they get new policies and procedures from the last session in place, the next legislature is already meeting and people are making changes to what they didn't like the last session. Nothing ever gets a chance, and when I say nothing, that's not a generality. The majority of things that were implemented from the previous session, or I should say passed, haven't even had a chance to be implemented.
Well, I think of the Read by 3 bill that was basically said if you can't read by grade level at third grade, you'll be held back. That was changed.
Right.
Before it took 4 years, but before it could be implemented, it was changed.
Right.
So I see what you're saying on that.
So to answer your question, we were able to get a diverse group of individuals on our board to support the commerce tax, and it was not easy. But when you lay out the statistics and you get everybody around the table to have a reasonable debate on one point, which is what do you want this to be? Not all of the special interest conversations, but how does this impact our economy? How does this impact where we as a community want to thrive? And what do we want the outcomes to be? Do we want the Review Journal to continue to publish? We're 49th, or I used to joke that we were 51st. I used to say that I think Guam or American Samoa or Puerto Rico did better than Nevada. But the reality is we have to prioritize. I know if I were a teacher in the Clark County School District and looked at the RJ in the morning and saw another negative headline about bad teachers and fights in the school district and all these things around K through 12, I don't know how I'd go to work. But they still do, Steve. They get up every morning and they go teach our kids and they engage, because when a teacher decides to be a teacher, that's what they want to do. They want to teach. They know when they're going to college they're never going to make $400,000 a year and get stock options and bonuses. That's not what they signed up for. They signed up to take that young mind and nurture that kid to become the next Speaker of the Assembly, the next CEO of a major gaming company, the next journalist, the next consultant, and maybe even the next superintendent. And if we look at it through that lens, that may remove some of the politics and may remove some of the junk that occurs.
You know, it strikes me that that's what you set out, you know, what kind of district do we want to be? That's probably a good place to start. Unfortunately, this is the place where we'll have to end. But a huge conversation, so we'll definitely want to have you back as we talk more about this and about some of the reforms that might make a difference in the district. So, Tom Skancke, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to see you.
Right.